Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mustafa Khan with Radio LUMS, hosting Providence. Pakistan finds itself in the midst of an economic crisis with issues of foreign debt, balance of payments, rising inflation, and so much more. The questions we have are, how did this come about? On Providence, we're always asking questions about the future, but today it's important to ask some questions about the past too, in order to answer questions for the future. And so today we have a very special guest for our listeners at Radio LUMS, Dr. Ijaz Nabi. Dr. Ijaz Nabi is a professor at LUMS and has decades of experience in research in economics and policy making, policy analysis at the highest echelons of both international organizations, private research, and the government as well. Dr. Nabi, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, Dr. Nabi, as I was just saying, it's important to talk about the past and the present in order to understand the future as well. So, the first question we have for you today is, how has economic policy making in the world in general, and more specifically in Pakistan, resulted in the sort of economic situation we find ourselves in today?
So, if you take the long-term view, which is always a good view to take, especially when you are going through somewhat difficult times, then it's good to keep the long-term view in mind. If you take the long-term view in mind, Pakistan has not done badly at all. Uh, our overall poverty reduction has been much better than most other countries. We rapidly reduced extreme poverty as measured by international academics and multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, etc., as defined by them, which is $1.90 a day. Extreme poverty in Pakistan has declined very, very rapidly, and we are outstanding in terms of comparisons with other South Asian economies. We are also seen a very nice, robust increase in the middle class in Pakistan. A lot of people have joined the middle class ranks. Um, we started off with virtually no industry. Pakistan, by the 80s and by the early 90s, Pakistan had a good manufacturing sector. Our exports to GDP till about the 90s were the highest in South Asia. Uh, well, considerably higher than India's, and not as high as Sri Lanka's. So the long-term trend has not been bad. In agriculture, we have diversified our crops compared to what we started off with. So long-term trends not so bad. But the mess that we are in today, and there's no doubt about it that we are in a mess. The mess we are in today is the result of trends that started more or less in the 90s. So it's been a long drawn trajectory which has brought us to this very difficult period. What that trajectory is, what are some of the central reasons why we ended up with that trajectory is an important question. It's a political economy question, and I'm happy to engage with that should you want to.
Right, that's a good discussion. The second question that we have is that when policies are made, there are certain guiding principles that any policy forming body holds and follows. What are some of the political, economic, and social principles that economic policy making the world over, and again, specifically in Pakistan, has followed? And how well have these been followed? And how do you think these principles and our choice of these principles has resulted in the economic situation we see ourselves in today?
All governments, all good governments, they start their planning process by keeping in the center the impact of that on the average citizen. The impact of the decisions that get taken on the so-called common man. So reduction in poverty is always a major objective of most development planning. creating jobs to reduce poverty is a naturally aligned mission of most economic planning exercises. Uh, and then you say, okay, now we want to create lots of jobs for people. What kind of investments do we need to create those jobs? So then you attract those investments. The government plays its role. You decide on what the government investment will be that attracts private investment, because private investment will be always is a much larger component of total investment. But the government can facilitate, can either encourage private investment or discourage private investment. So most good policy planners will want to have a public investment program and design it to attract a lot of private investment. So these are the central pillars of most sound economic planning. The objective of equity is met because you focus on the poor and providing employment to the poor. In a country like Pakistan, which is a federation, we also worry about regional inequality. We can't have just growth in Punjab or central Punjab and ignore southern Punjab. We can't have growth just in Karachi and ignore what is happening to rural Sindh, and similarly in KP and Balochistan. So regional equity is also a major concern. So you have to make sure that public investments are being designed in a way that all regions are able to attract private investment and create jobs for people. So these are the basic sound principles. And I think by and large, we have tried to follow the same principles. Um, Now, sometimes we have gone off the rails because of other priorities, because of other emergencies. We have not been able to sustain this effort. So instead of this long-term objective of creating jobs where they are needed, we've ended up with government decision making, which is extremely short term, just hand to mouth kind of decisions to avoid the next difficult crisis kind of decisions, and that has started to happen very frequently since about the mid 90s, I'd say. The second half of Musharraf is when this process of frequent macroeconomic crises starts, and that has continued right to this day. So what we are observing today is it has happened because we went off that long-term planning mode in which employment generation was the central objective to very short-term decision making so that the government could make its ends meet, so that we don't run into balance of payments crisis. And that transition has happened in the last 30 years or so. It's very interesting that Pakistan's macroeconomic difficulties, Pakistan's slowdown of growth, Pakistan's balance of payments crises. It's very interesting that this happens around the same time as our engagement in Afghanistan begins to increase. Because a fallout of that engagement has been that Pakistan has turned into a security state, because there was a blowback from that engagement. And that blowback has been happening over a long period of time. There are different kinds of blowbacks. The first is a financial blowback. We started to receive, Pakistan received a lot of foreign assistance in its golden earlier years also. The late 50s, 60s, Pakistan received a lot of foreign assistance. But that foreign assistance was mostly in project aid. So we built dams, we built the link canals, we built roads, we upgraded the railways, we upgraded the electricity grid of Pakistan. It all happened in those investments of 60s, 50s and 60s, late 50s and 60s investments. And they had a big payoff in terms of growth, attracting private investment and giving us growth. But the concessionary assistance that we got um, starting the late 80s and early 90s, the mode of that assistance changed. It went to mostly budget support assistance, quick disbursing budget support assistance, because our expenditures had become very large as a result of many things, but including the war effort in Afghanistan, etc. So our security needs increased a lot. And so the budget started to get into difficulties. And so a lot of the foreign assistance that came since then was quick disbursing budget support, balance of payment support assistance. Now, although this assistance came with a lot of conditions which required you to improve the investment climate, to attract more private investment, we didn't really do that kind of improvement. We didn't really do our part of the bargain in improving those conditions for investment. And in any case, when we turned into a security state, it required much more than doing those small changes to improve the investment climate. We had to improve the overall impression of investors that investing in Pakistan carries risk, carries political risk because of the security situation. So then, what happened? I mean, we were still getting a lot of money as foreign assistance, but we were also getting a lot of remittances because starting the 80s, a lot of Pakistanis started to go outside the country to work because we were not creating enough jobs ourselves. So a lot of people went out, which was a good thing because most of the people who went out, they went from low-income households. So those low-income households benefited from remittances. So we had remittances coming in for a long period of time. There's still about $17-18 billion a year, which is a lot of money. And then we had a lot of foreign assistance coming in. Now, what was happening was that this money was feeding a lot of consumption. Pakistan's consumption to GDP ratio shot up. And today we consume 95%. 95% of the GDP is consumption. Very low savings, very low investment compared to other South Asian economies. And whatever savings there are, they are getting parked in land speculation. So you've got a lot of real estate development. When you drive along the motorways, even in Lahore, you see these big hoardings about this scheme and that scheme, etc., not to mention all these defense housing schemes that have come up everywhere. So because of the tax policy and because of poor regulations and because of undervaluation of land, returns to investments in land speculation increased enormously in this period. I've seen some calculations that these are as high as 40% per annum. So people started to park whatever savings they had in land speculation. And that's not a very productive form of productive form of investments. Because when you look at what's happening in the real economy, our manufacturing is flat. Manufacturing to GDP is not increased at all. And our exports to GDP have actually declined. So two sectors of the economy were growing very rapidly. One was, land, real estate, and the other was consumption, was retail trade. Leading industrialists were moving from manufacturing into shopping malls. And yeah, because there was a big consumption boom as a result of this large flow of money that was coming into the country, concessionary foreign assistance, which means money coming from the World Bank, ADB, bilaterals, etc., and much more importantly, remittances. So this was creating two huge sectors which are non-tradable sectors. So people are often calling this phenomena a Dutch disease. It's called a Dutch disease because Holland experienced this in a big way when they found natural resources. Holland was a very competitive economy, and then they found natural resources, and the value of the guilder shot up. And so all the other activities at which the Dutch were very good became uncompetitive. That's why it's called the Dutch disease. So many people have said that this phenomena that Pakistan experienced, which is that a lot of investment was going into the real estate sector, and there was a big consumption boom. So retail and wholesale trade were growing very rapidly, but these were non-tradables. So every time we have growth, we have real estate returns rising, we have wholesale and retail sector of the economy going up, and a lot of consumption is imported as consumption. So you have that translates into a large trade deficit, and that translates into a balance of payments crisis very frequently, because the trade deficit is so large that even the remittances coming in can't adequately pay for that trade deficit. Okay, so the question is, what was why was it happening to our economy, and why wasn't anything done to stop it? And it wasn't just one kind of government. It happened under all governments. It happened under the military government of Musharraf. It happened under the elected governments of PPP, PMLN. Even in PTI time, the same trend continued. The trend has not been reversed. And it is this trend which will need to be reversed for us to get out of this trap of frequent macroeconomic imbalances, macroeconomic crises, etc. We've also had the tendency of overvaluing the exchange rate because remittances were coming in. So the real effective exchange rate, which is what economists usually talk about, that would continue to appreciate. And we had finance ministers. We still have a finance minister who strongly believes that there is a value of the rupee somehow known to him, which it should take, and as soon as you do that, you start a speculative run on the rupee. So the question then is, if this trend has been happening for the last 30 years or so, how will we reverse this trend? What will it take to reverse this trend? And I'm afraid it will take a lot of very disciplined decision making, and it will take a lot of people getting hurt who are benefiting from this. People make a huge amount of money in land speculation. There are some very, very rich people who've made money from land speculation. They will be hurt because the sector has to be taxed. Income is income. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from agriculture, or it's coming from manufacturing, or it's coming from retail, or it's coming from land speculation. Income has to be treated equally, regardless of where it comes from. So many people who are currently out of the tax net will have to be brought into the tax net. Not that we should have higher taxation for every individual. No, the tax rates are fine. But only a few people end up paying taxes. There's a large number of people, large number of activities that are not being taxed. That has to change. And that will require political capital. So we will be a political party that is most likely to address that is the one that we should vote for. And that political party will have to hurt very powerful interest groups. So that's and who these interest groups are. You just have to do a good analysis of saying who owns the largest of these sort of land speculation schemes, etc., and bring them into the tax. I'm not saying go after them in any that they are indulging in criminal activity. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that uh, they are not in the standard tax regime, and they have to be brought into the standard tax regime so that the rates of return in land speculation decrease, so that people begin to think of other options for parking their money. But that was not enough. We'll have to make it attractive. We'll have to make other sectors attractive. We'll have to address what difficulties exporters have and start removing those difficulties. And these difficulties are they don't have skilled labor, they don't have they don't have the right infrastructure. Their costs for transporting goods from the cities where they're manufactured to the ports are very high. They don't have buyers coming into the country. Their inputs are taxed, but those duties are not paid back in time for these guys. So these are the things that we need to address to make it attractive for these investments to go from land speculation into productive activity, because that activity will create jobs. And creating jobs has to be the mission of all sound policymaking. So that's one set. The other big sector we'll have to address is retail trade. A lot of the retail trade is out of the tax net. And they are very organized. They don't want to come into the tax net. And it's not that the sales tax that they will have to pay, they don't pay the sales tax. The consumers pay the sales tax, right? So then why is it that they don't want to come into the tax net? Because then the tax authorities will know how much sales revenue they get. And from that, they will get to know how much income they make. And then they will be brought into the income tax net. And they don't want to come into the income tax net. That will have to be addressed. That's a very strong political lobby. And political parties that cannot wean themselves away from those lobbies, they will have to be voted out. We'll have to bring in political parties who can address, or all parties who are worthy of our vote, because we expect change. So we expect more productive sectors of the economy to get the investments and get more economic activity going. If political parties make the change and become bringers of change, then the political parties deserve our vote. So those are the difficult political decisions that need to be taken. Weaning away the economy from land speculation and retail to manufacturing and exports.
Now, Dr. Nabi, in the course I took with you where we studied issues in economic policy, you once gave an analogy that the role of the government in an economy is to make it like an efficient traffic system. The idea you gave was of a traffic intersection where the road is so well built, the traffic signals work so well, and the people, the traffic, the cars follow it so well that there's no need for any further intervention. When the light is green, the car will go. When the light is red, the car will stop. And that's how you liken private investment. It's the role of the government to build the infrastructure, to build the institutions that will allow private investment to go through unfettered, to sort of, align itself in the best possible way for the economy. If you permit the analogy that I'm going to add to this, I would say that political decision making in Pakistan has been influenced, if not directly controlled, by the very sectors that you just said in your previous answer that need to be reformed, where lobbying, economic lobbying, and also direct control of state institutions by these very same sectors that remain unprofitable, that remain inefficient, uncompetitive on international markets, These are the very sectors that are making our economic policy. And so there's a very large, incentive for rent seeking, for the status quo to remain the way it is. So how would you respond to this?
Yes, um, a- I would supplement that with one other uh, function of the government. Is, of course, the government has to has to make the rules so that, like the traffic, uh, things flow smoothly. Uh, the government doesn't, um, and everybody obeys the same rule, right? But if you say, okay, look, I will only allow red cars to move, not others, or I will selectively say, okay, if it's a big car, you can go, the small car stays, then very soon the system will get jammed up completely, and things will not move, or only the red car people will remain driving, and the others will disappear, etc., etc. So the real estate and retail analogy is that if the government says, okay, everybody else will stop at the traffic light, but if you have a an orange color car, which means real estate, or a blue color car, which is retail trade, you can go through. It's like saying, you guys don't pay tax, everybody else pays tax. Then of course the system, will end up with only blue and orange cars, and the others will disappear. So that's where this analogy works. But the government also has another very important function, which is that everybody doesn't have a car, right? So everybody can't participate. Everybody doesn't have a motorbike. Everybody can't participate in this system of traffic. There are some people out there who'd like to participate but can't. So the government does the second thing, which is that everybody who enters this traffic system has to pay a certain tax to come in. And that tax is levied on everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, you pay that tax. And you can make the tax progressive. The larger the car, the more tax. But everybody has to pay a tax. And then you use that money to let the people who are not part of this system of traffic, let them acquire appropriate vehicles, so that they can also be part of the system. So collecting taxes to make sure that for equity objectives, those who don't have cars, is like giving employment to people who are unemployed, right? That's an important part of what the government does. So those two things: make sure the traffic keeps moving, and make sure that those who are able to move will pay a tax, so that those who are outside can also come inside. So those are the two important functions of the government. There's a third very important function of the government, which is, that currently all people who are in the traffic system are using um, hydrocarbon fuels. And these hydrocarbon fuels are causing pollution, two types of pollution. One is, of course, poor quality of air for people to breathe, and that's causing, health impact. So it needs to be stopped. The other is what it is doing to global warming, and therefore, for both of these reasons, we have to make sure that people who are coming into the traffic system are using clean fuels, non-hydrogen fuels. Uh, uh, that's another important function of the government. So those are the kinds of functions of the government. And if the government were to do that, irrespective, and apply those rules irrespective of who you are, then we have good governance, right? But if you don't do that, then system gets clogged up, which is the same thing as bad governance. Okay. So that basic analogy, you can build on it in order to have a comprehensive definition of what good governance is.
That's a very good analogy, and I'll confess I hadn't seen the things that you've added to it, and they really do make sense. Now, Dr. Nabi, we've, coming to our concluding comments, we've talked about the problems in Pakistani policymaking and the solutions that you have posited as well. And, on paper, this seem, this is what we need to do. But realistically speaking, how do you see the future of Pakistani economic policy making? Do you see our successive governments in the short term and the long run sticking to this consensus that Pakistan needs to change its economic policy and to do this in a way that pursues economic growth and development in sustainable and broad based ways? Or do you think we're stuck in a vicious cycle where we can't break free from? How do you see the future of Pakistani economic policy making?
Okay. So how do you bring about change, right? That's your question. How do you bring about change? We know what we are observing is not great. And we know that if this continues, things can only get worse, right? What do we pin our hopes on? Do we pin our hopes on one political party? Do we pin our hopes on somebody outside the political system fixing our problems? What do we pin our hopes on? It's a very tough question to answer. When I was your age, we had a blind faith in the system. We thought the government was very good. We thought these guys take good decisions. We believed in the system because we were growing up at a time when things were improving. Generation after generation was seeing positive change. So we believed in the system. But when I reached my 50s, I began to be a little doubtful. In my 60s, I began to get frustrated. Now I'm dejected that what I believed was not true. That people come into power and they only focus on personal gains. That they say that they're the right things, they mouth the right slogans, and it doesn't matter whether it's military government or elected governments. They mouth the right slogans, but they are so deeply beholden to their interest groups, their support groups, that they can't escape it. I also find that some parties who want to escape it, they haven't yet figured out how to escape it. Normally you expect that the academia and the observers of the system, critics of the system will point out these weaknesses, will monitor effectively what the government is doing, point out what's going wrong, and so the government can begin to fix. But I'm very disappointed and dejected in the quality of public debate that I hear on the media, on television, etc. Especially on television. Newspapers still have readable articles, but television discussions are really disappointing. So, what do I pin my hopes on? I pin my hopes on your generation, younger people. You are much more skeptical about the government. You have to learn how to monitor government performance. You have to come to a consensus on the kind of change that you want. And once you have an idea of the kind of change you want, then you have to have the technical skill to make sure that you understand the policy change that will achieve that objective, right? And then you have to monitor whether the government is doing that policy change, right? And that's the biggest pressure. I think we've seen in the last year or so how the youth of Pakistan are now playing a very active role in the political scene. But this role has to become a more mature role in which you actually monitor the performance of any government. It doesn't matter whether it's PMLN or People's Party or PTI. All governments need to be monitored, because when people become powerful, they need to be monitored even more, because they can do serious harm, even while they mean well. So I think acquiring the skills, to know the policy framework that will bring about the change that you want, and then acquiring the skills to monitor whether the government is indeed implementing those policies. You have to be, you are skeptical of the government in a healthy way, your generation, and that has to be translated into actionable things that you guys can do. And that is what will keep the government straight and narrow and bring about the change that we need.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nabi. It was a pleasure to have you on the show with us. To all our listeners at Radio LUMS, this was Providence, talking about Pakistani economic policy making, past, present, and future. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in next time.